The blue house was unusually quiet. Noah was asleep in the spare room, still recovering from the exhaustion of the past few days while Tate lay resting in his bed next door. Dr. Bennett approached Tate carefully in the boy's room and began his examination while Terrence stood nearby. After a few moments his expression changed. "He's more than just running a fever," the doctor said. Terrence immediately looked concerned. "What do you mean?" Dr. Bennett continued his examination. "His body temperature is actually quite low. He's cold and clammy, and I don't want to assume this is just a simple illness." Terrence's face tightened with worry. "What could it be?" "I don't know yet," Dr. Bennett replied. "That's why we're going to run some tests. I want to take blood samples and also collect stool tests. We need to rule out anything related to his diet, an infection, or another underlying health issue." The doctor looked back at Tate. "Does he have any previous medical conditions I should know about?" Terrence hesitated. "Well, he has seizures," he explained, "and some emotional difficulties, but I don't think that would explain the vomiting." Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. "You're right that emotional distress usually doesn't explain everything, but with children, especially children who have complex reactions to stress, we can't always predict how their bodies will respond." He gathered his supplies. "The important thing is that we're going to look at all possibilities. We'll get the tests done, and it should take about 24 hours for me to have more information." Terrence nodded, though his worry remained. "And then we'll decide what the next step should be," Dr. Bennett said calmly. "For now, we'll focus on finding out what's going on." After the doctor left the room to begin the tests, Terrence stayed beside Tate, watching his son sleep. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to admit how scared he was. Dr. Bennett returned the next day. Terrence was waiting for him, still carrying the worry from everything that had happened. The doctor stepped inside and looked through his notes. "I got the blood test results back," Dr. Bennett said. Terrence immediately looked up. "And?" Dr. Bennett nodded. "From what I can see, he doesn't appear to have any major medical conditions. Nothing concerning showed up in the blood work." Terrence let out a small breath of relief. "What about the vomiting?" "That's the strangest part," Dr. Bennett admitted. "He doesn't appear to have eaten anything that would suggest food poisoning or a reaction to something in his diet." He paused, thinking. Sometimes children become sick after being exhausted, stressed, or exposed to changes in temperature. It's possible he simply wore himself out, got chilled, and his body reacted. Terrence nodded slowly. "Is there anything else?" Dr. Bennett looked back at his notes. "There is one thing I did notice. Your son appears to be constipated and he has hemorrhoids. That could certainly cause discomfort and distress, especially for a child who may already have difficulty expressing when something is wrong." Terrence frowned with concern. "Could that explain everything?" "It could explain some of it," Dr. Bennett said, "but I still don't have one clear answer for why he became cold and clammy. Sometimes children have symptoms that don't immediately point to one obvious cause." He closed the file. "There is one other thing I would like to talk to you about." 2 hours later, Talia had returned home from her pediatric meeting at the hospital. She stepped inside, setting her things down, then noticed how quiet the house was. Her eyes moved toward the living room. Noah was asleep on the couch, resting peacefully. She looked toward Terrence. "What happened?" Terrence walked over to her. "Dr. Bennett was just here." Talia immediately became concerned. "Is Tate okay?" Terrence nodded. "Yes, the tests came back fine, nothing unusual showed up. He said there was no sign of food poisoning or any serious medical condition." Talia's shoulders relaxed. "That's a relief." "He's already starting to feel better," Terrence added. Talia looked toward the hallway where Tate was resting. For the first time in a while, the house felt calm again. Terrence decided he wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Even though Dr. Bennett had reassured him that the tests didn't show anything serious, the uncertainty still bothered him. As Tate's father, he needed to know that every possibility had been considered. So he sought out a second opinion. The new doctor, Dr. Simon Foyle, immediately put Terrence at ease. He was patient, thorough, and took the time to listen, not just to the medical details but to the stories about Tate himself. After a few visits, Terrence found himself trusting him more and more. Eventually, the family decided to switch doctors. Dr. Foyle seemed to genuinely enjoy having Tate as a patient. He never treated him like he was simply a list of symptoms. He seemed amused by Tate's personality, his dramatic imagination, and the way he experienced the world so intensely. During one of his house visits, Dr. Foyle examined Tate while he rested on the bed. Tate, as usual, made the process more complicated than necessary. His long legs and gangly little limbs stretched across the bed, hanging over the edge as he shifted around, curious about everything the doctor was doing. Dr. Foyle smiled. "You certainly don't stay still very easily, do you?" Tate looked at him seriously. "I'm helping." Dr. Foyle raised an eyebrow. "Helping?" "Yes," Tate explained. "I'm making sure you do it right." The doctor laughed softly. "I see, so you're supervising me." Tate nodded as though this was obvious. Terrence watched from the doorway, a small smile appearing on his face. For the first time in a while, he felt like they had found someone who saw Tate as more than a difficult situation. Dr. Foyle saw a child. A complicated child. An unusual child. But still a child who deserved patience and understanding. Tate tilted his head, his small brow furrowing in curiosity as he studied Dr. Foyle. The doctor, with his stethoscope around his neck and a kind smile, seemed like a gentle giant to Tate. He decided to ask the question that had been buzzing in his mind since he heard the other kids at daycare talking about their visits to the doctor. "Dr. Foyle," Tate began, his voice soft and innocent, "can I ask a question?" The doctor nodded, his eyes twinkling with warmth. Tate took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I saw on TV that doctors check their, he paused, searching for the right words, his cheeks turning a slight shade of pink. "They said you check their prostates for cancer. Is that true? Are you gonna check mine too?" He looked up at Dr. Foyle, his big hazel eyes filled with a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and a touch of embarrassment. Dr. Foyle, taken aback, let out a hearty laugh. He set the reflex hammer down on the exam table and leaned in closer to Tate, his eyes sparkling with mirth. "Well, Tate, that's quite the question," he said, his voice filled with genuine amusement. "I must say you're a very observant little fellow, but let me tell you a secret. Doctors like me check many things on a little boy's body, but we usually don't check their prostates unless you're an adult male, as you so eloquently put it, unless it's absolutely necessary. You see, we have to make sure everything is working properly from your head down to your toes. And sometimes that means checking places that might seem a bit private." He paused, watching Tate's expression carefully. "But Tate, you don't have to worry about that today. Today we're just going to check your reflexes, see if your legs can dance when I tap your knees. How does that sound?" He extended his hand, waiting for Tate's small palm to meet his. "Deal." Dr. Foyle's face suddenly shifted, the warm smile freezing as shock widened his eyes. His hand hovered in midair, the offer of a handshake forgotten. The color drained slightly from his cheeks and he straightened up, clearing his throat with a nervous cough. Tate swung his small legs against the side of the exam table, kicking lightly as he answered without hesitation. The boy had to stand there with his hands on his head while the doctor touched it and moved it around to check everything. It looked like it took a long time. The boy said it tickled, but the doctor told him it was important. Dr. Foyle's mouth opened and closed once before he managed words. That must have been a medical drama or something educational, Tate. Those adult shows sometimes show procedures that are part of a normal checkup. Real doctors check for cancer, swelling, or other issues." Tate's big hazel eyes stayed fixed on the doctor. Innocent and direct. But it looked real. The doctor even put on gloves and everything. He told the boy to cough while he held it. "Is that how you do it too?" The little boy's voice stayed soft, curious, no trace of anything but genuine wonder. Dr. Foyle forced a gentle smile back onto his face, though his eyes still held that shocked edge. "Of course I'll always explain everything, buddy. Now how about we start with those knee taps? Have you ever thought about becoming a doctor, little boy?" Tate nodded. After Tate's illness improved, the change in him became more noticeable in a way that unsettled Talia and Terrence more than his earlier intense reactions ever had. Physically, he was recovering well. His appetite returned in small steps and his energy came back in short bursts. But emotionally, something felt different. The sharp highs and lows around Noah were gone, so were the big reactions. Instead, Tate moved through the house quietly, almost distant. Talia noticed it first and hoped Tate would return to normal soon. Joey became part of these conversations whenever he visited. He had always been someone Tate responded to more easily even as he got older, so his perspective mattered to them. One evening, after dinner, the three adults sat in the living room while Tate and I were in the other room. "He's very particular about touch," Talia said. "He avoids it almost completely unless it's Noah or you, Joey." Joey nodded. "Noah mentioned he's being bullied at school. It's nothing serious. It's just verbal altercations, nothing that's graduated into actual violence or pushing," Joey smiled. "If someone touches him, he might be expecting verbal insults. Some kids develop really strict rules around physical contact when they feel overstimulated or overwhelmed." Terrence leaned forward slightly. "So it's not rejection of people?" "Not necessarily," Joey said. "It's more like control over input. Touch can be a lot for some kids. If he learned early on that certain interactions felt overwhelming, he might have just decided to limit them across the board." Talia sighed. "I keep trying to understand when it changed. It didn't feel sudden, it just became who he is." Joey looked toward the hallway, where Tate's voice could be faintly heard talking with Noah. "It probably wasn't one moment," he said. "It was gradual, and now it's just his baseline." Terrence crossed his arms. "And Noah?" Joey paused slightly before answering. "He seems to be the one exception where Tate doesn't feel the same distance," he said carefully. "That connection is still there, it just looks different from how we expected it to." Talia rested her hands together. "I just want to make sure he's okay." Joey nodded. "The important thing is he is functioning. He's just structured differently socially and emotionally than other kids his age." A quiet settled over the room. Talia glanced again toward the hallway, her expression soft but uncertain. "He's still our kid," she said quietly. Joey gave a small nod. "Yeah, he is, just in his own way." Around the time they were about 10, Tate and Noah found a shared language in something that didn't require much talking at all: wrestling. It usually started casually in the living room, with one of them nudging the other or challenging them in a half-joking way. Within seconds, it would turn into rolling on the carpet, laughing, scrambling for position, and trying to pin each other in increasingly creative ways. Talia often heard it from the kitchen first: soft thumps on the rug, bursts of laughter, and the sound of two kids completely absorbed in their own world. At that age, Tate had started to grow taller and stronger while Noah was still smaller and lighter. But neither of them treated it like a competition in any serious way. It stayed playful, more about momentum and timing than strength alone. Tate managed to get Noah pinned on the floor one afternoon, bracing his hands carefully so he didn't put too much weight on him. "I win," Tate said, breathing a little hard but smiling. "No, you don't," Noah replied immediately, laughing as he tried to twist free. Tate shifted his grip slightly, still keeping it playful. "Yes, I do." "Nope," Noah insisted, still laughing. "This is not over." Tate huffed a laugh and leaned in, switching tactics instead of force, starting to lightly tickle Noah's sides to break his focus. Noah immediately squirmed, laughing harder. Stop, that's cheating." "It's a strategy," Tate said, grinning. "No, it's not," Noah protested through laughter, trying to roll away. Talia paused in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching them. She didn't interrupt, just observed the way the tension that sometimes followed Tate in other settings disappeared completely here. There was no distance in him right now, no withdrawal, just simple childhood ease. "Noah, concede," Tate said, still tickling lightly. "No," Noah said, out of breath from laughing. "I don't surrender." Tate stopped for a second, considering this, then shifted his weight and tried a different hold instead, careful not to hurt him, just trying to keep the playful match going. "Still pinned," Tate declared. Uncle Tim, who was visiting for the weekend, looked up from his newspaper and smiled, watching his two nephews rolling around on the floor, trying to one-up each other. "No, I'm not," Noah shot back, smiling widely even as he stayed on the floor. "I'm just temporarily grounded." Tate laughed at that, loosening his hold a little without fully letting go. Talia finally spoke from the kitchen, her voice warm but gently firm. "You two okay in there?" "Yeah," Noah called back quickly. "We're training," Tate added, like it was very serious business. Talia shook her head slightly with a small smile, turning back to what she was doing. On the floor, Noah tried one more escape roll and Tate adjusted just enough to keep up with him, both of them laughing again as the match continued, not about winning or losing but just about being kids who, for that moment, were completely in sync. Tate giggled as he held Noah lightly on the carpet. "Are you going to give up?" Tate asked, looking down at him with a playful grin. "No way," Noah said immediately, still laughing as he squirmed to try to roll out from under him. Tate shook his head, amused. "You're definitely pinned." "I'm strategically delayed," Noah argued, breathless with laughter. Tate laughed at that and loosened his hold just enough for Noah to try another escape. The two of them rolled across the rug again, bumping into a pillow as they went, both of them laughing too hard to keep any real control over the match. Aunt Julia lifted her feet so the kids wouldn't roll over her shoes as Noah and Tate giggled on the carpet. Talia glanced over from the kitchen and smiled to herself. The sound of their laughter filled the room, light and easy in a way she didn't always hear from Tate in other parts of his life. "No roughhousing near the furniture," she called gently. "We're fine," Noah called back, still laughing. Tate shifted again, keeping the play going but easing up as Noah wriggled free just enough to get a breath. "No fair," Noah said, grinning up at him. "It's very fair," Tate replied, smiling. "You just need a better strategy." He glanced at Tate again, at how easy he looked sitting there, completely unaware of any of the internal noise Noah sometimes had to push down just to keep things normal between them. Noah quickly looked away again. "Rematch later?" Tate asked casually. Noah let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. "You're obsessed." "You lost," Tate reminded him. "I almost won," Noah corrected. Tate grinned. "Almost doesn't count." Talia called from the kitchen, "If you two are done destroying the living room, I'd like it to still exist tomorrow." "We're done," Tate called back. "No promises," Noah added under his breath, earning a laugh from Tate. They stayed sitting there for a moment longer, the conversation drifting again into easy teasing, but Noah stayed a little quieter than usual, letting the moment pass through him without nomming anything underneath it, just keeping pace with Tate like he always did. No one really noticed at first how fast Tate actually was when he ran. At school, he didn't join athletics not because he couldn't but because he didn't like the idea of doing it without Noah. So instead, they'd run outside near Tate's house or along quiet streets, just the two of them, turning it into something casual rather than competitive. Tate always pulled ahead easily. He had a long stride and a natural ease of movement that made it look like he wasn't even trying, while Noah trailed behind him, doing his best to keep up but tiring faster. Noah was smaller, with shorter legs, compact, built differently. And it showed most clearly when they ran together. Tate would glance back sometimes, slowing just enough not to lose him completely but never needing to push himself. At school during gym class, Tate's physical ability showed in other ways too. Wrestling drills came easily to him. He could twist out of holds, shift his weight quickly, and slip free from positions that left other students stuck. It wasn't about aggression, it was just coordination, balance, and awareness of how his body moved in space. Still, he rarely participated in anything competitive in a formal way. He didn't care about teams or rankings the way other students did. If anything, he treated physical activity like something shared rather than something to win. After school, when it was just the two of them again, running felt different. Less structured, more natural. Tate would take off down the path and Noah would follow, laughing and calling after him when he got too far ahead. And even when Noah couldn't match his speed, he still kept going, because that was usually how it was between them, Tate moving fast and Noah always finding a way to stay close behind his buddy. 10-year Noah knew most of Tate's family well by now, having met nearly all of them over the years. There were his older male uncles, Tim, who was 34, both of whom carried himself with the quiet confidence of people used to being listened to in any room he entered. Aunt Julia, 33, was married to Tim, while Talia was 31 and Terrence was 4 years older. Noah had learned early on that Tate's relatives lived within the framework of a protected family trust, carefully managed and funded under Grandpa Gene's authority. It was something spoken about indirectly but understood clearly. Once he passed when Tate was 3, the responsibility and control of everything shifted to Terrence and ultimately to Tate one day. Despite the wealth, status, and the unmistakable old family air about them, Noah didn't dislike them. They were generally kind to him in their own way, polite, welcoming, and even warm at times, but there was an unmistakable layer of formality beneath it all, a kind of refined distance that made the family feel both friendly and slightly untouchable, like they existed in a world built on tradition, expectation, and quiet privilege. Tate's extended family only came out a few times a month, most of them living on the East Coast near New York City, where the family's main residence and business ties were based. The only consistent exceptions were Uncle Joey, who lived in Europe, and Uncle Tim, who called NYC home. Joey had explained more than once that part of the reason he tried so hard to stay close was because of his own childhood. He had grown up without much family involvement and didn't want Tate to experience that same emotional distance from the people who were supposed to be there for him. Joey was only about 10 years older than Tate, which made their relationship feel less like a traditional uncle-nephew dynamic and more like a blend of mentorship and close family companionship, especially as Tate grew older. Because of that, Joey's presence felt different from the rest of the family. While the others came and went with schedules, obligations, and formal visits, Joey tended to stay longer, show up more casually, and focus more on spending real time with Tate rather than just attending family events. Over time, that consistency made him one of the few relatives Tate actually looked forward to seeing regularly. Tate didn't really have friends growing up, and as he got older it became clear that social situations were something he struggled with. He was quiet, reserved, and often overwhelmed in groups, preferring familiar environments and familiar people over anything unfamiliar or unpredictable. Because of that, his closest relationships were always with his uncles Joey and Tim. Tate would write letters about small, everyday things, and his uncles would always write back, sending postcards from different countries, short notes about places he'd seen, and small gifts he picked up along the way that reminded him of Tate. Over time, it became a steady exchange that helped Tate feel connected even when Joey was far away. Even Linus, who was 39 and Tate's godfather, sent postcards once a month. Julia took Tate out when she and Tim were in town, sometimes to the cinema or small outings that didn't require too much social interaction or attention from others. Those quieter activities suited Tate better, and over time he became more comfortable with those structured, low-pressure settings. As Tate grew into his early teens, especially around 13, most of the broader family involvement gradually became less frequent or less consistent. The larger gatherings faded, and the attention from extended relatives naturally lessened as everyone became more occupied with their own lives. Around the age of 13, Tate began to grow noticeably closer to Noah again. Their bond shifted into something more consistent and central in his life, and as that happened, his relationship with Uncle Joey began to change. Tate started choosing to spend most of his time with Noah, often declining opportunities to go out with Joey, Julia, or Tim, or respond to their invitations when in town. It wasn't framed as rejection in a dramatic sense, but more as a quiet preference that gradually became consistent over time. Noah simply became the person Tate defaulted to in his day-to-day life. Joey's travel schedule also made things more complicated. As his work took him further away and more frequently, his visits to California became less common and harder to coordinate. The letters and postcards that once kept their connection steady also became less frequent, and eventually slowed to a stop as his time became more consumed by work commitments. By the time Tate was around 15, the distance between them had become more emotionally noticeable. Tate began to express frustration and disappointment about Joey's and Tim's absences and the nature of their jobs, feeling like it kept them from maintaining the closeness they once had. That frustration sometimes turned into avoidance when Joey or Tim did visit, especially during the rare occasions they came to California once a year. Instead of engaging like he used to, Tate would often keep his distance or respond minimally, struggling to reconnect in the same easy way they once had. What had once been a close and steady relationship now felt strained by time, distance, and unmet expectations on both sides, with neither fully able to bridge the gap that had formed. Tate had always relied on Joey in a way that felt important to him, so the shift created a deep sense of disappointment. From his perspective, Joey's absence wasn't just physical, it felt like emotional distance too, especially during long stretches when there were no letters or contact. Over time, that absence turned into resentment, and that resentment made it harder for him to engage with Joey even when he was trying to reconnect. Joey, for his part, continued to make efforts whenever he could, but the limited time together often wasn't enough to repair the growing gap. What had once been a steady bond now felt strained and fragile, with both of them trying in different ways but missing each other emotionally. At one dinner during one of Joey's rare visits, the tension finally came to a head. Tate, overwhelmed and unable to hold back what he was feeling anymore, made it clear that he didn't want the same closeness they once had and didn't want to continue the pattern of brief, disconnected visits. At 14, Tate exploded with resentment. He accused Joey of choosing Noah over him, even though Noah wasn't even Joey's nephew. It wasn't said calmly, and it wasn't easy for anyone at the table to hear, but it reflected the depth of frustration he had been carrying for a long time. "You always choose him," Tate shouted, his voice cracking with hurt and fury. "I'm your family, not him." Before anyone could react, Tate snatched a crystal wineglass from the table and hurled its contents straight into Joey's face. Red wine splashed across Joey's suit and sprayed onto Julia, staining her dress as she recoiled in shock. Silence fell over the dining room. Tate stood there for only a heartbeat, his chest heaving as everyone stared at him. Then he turned on his heel, stormed out of the dining room, and thundered up the stairs, slamming his bedroom door hard enough to shake the walls. Downstairs, Joey slowly wiped the wine from his face while Julia dabbed at the stains on her clothing. Neither of them spoke immediately, both recognizing that Tate's outburst had come from a place of deep jealousy and fear of being replaced, even if his actions were completely unacceptable. The room went quiet afterward, with Joey visibly affected but not reacting defensively. And Talia and Terrence trying to process what had just been said. What remained was a painful clarity. The closeness between Tate and Joey had changed, and neither of them had fully been able to prevent it from breaking in the way it did. Tate pulled away from Joey, feeling abandoned, and told him that he no longer wanted contact. Joey kept trying to rebuild some kind of connection with Tate whenever he was in California, even when it was clear Tate was guarded and distant. Tim and Julia also made efforts in their own way, attempting to include him in conversations or invite him to spend time together, but Tate often responded with resistance or withdrawal, unsure how to engage without feeling disappointed again. The difficulty wasn't a lack of care on either side. It was timing, distance, and expectation that never quite aligned. Tate wanted consistency and regular presence, while the adults in his life were split across careers, travel, and obligations that made that level of contact difficult to maintain. That mismatch created frustration on both sides, especially for Tate, who struggled to understand why relationships could feel warm one moment and absent the next. One evening, during a visit when Joey had flown in briefly, the tension finally broke into open conflict at the house. Joey tried to approach Tate in the living room where he was sitting alone. "Hey," Joey said carefully, "I've been trying to reach you, can we talk?" Tate didn't look up immediately. "We already talked." "No," Joey replied gently, stepping closer. "We didn't, you just shut me out." Tate finally glanced at him. "Because you're not here, Joey, you're never here." Joey sighed, trying to stay calm. "That's not fair, I come when I can." "When you can," Tate repeated sharply. "That's the problem, it's always when you can, never when I need you." Tim, who had been nearby, spoke up quietly. "Tate, he's trying, we all are." Tate shook his head. "No, you show up and then leave again like it doesn't matter." Joey's expression tightened slightly. "It matters, I wouldn't be here otherwise." "It doesn't feel like it matters," Tate snapped back. "It feels like I'm optional." The room went quiet for a moment. Tim stepped in gently. "Maybe we're all talking past each other here." Tate let out a short, frustrated breath. "No, I'm talking, nobody listens unless it's convenient." Joey took a slow breath. "Tate, I never stopped caring about you." Tate finally stood up. "Then act like it." The words hung in the air. Joey looked like he wanted to respond immediately but held back, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know how to be in two places at once." Tate shook his head again. "Then don't be surprised when I stop waiting." Silence followed, heavier this time, as none of them immediately knew how to bridge the gap that had formed, not from lack of feeling, but from years of misalignment in how that feeling was expressed and received. 2 years earlier, when Tate was 13, he had waited most of the day expecting the usual rhythm, some family showing up, messages, calls, even if brief. But the hours stretched on and nothing came. No one arrived, no one checked in. What he didn't know was that a severe weather system had hit the region where much of his family was traveling. The phone lines in parts of Colorado were down, flights were grounded, and communication had been disrupted entirely. From the outside, though, all Tate experienced was absence. By evening, the house felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Every passing hour made it harder to convince himself it was just delayed. It stopped feeling like timing and started feeling like abandonment. When the realization fully settled in, it hit him all at once. Tate's reaction wasn't loud at first, just stillness, followed by sharp, uneven breathing as he tried to make sense of what wasn't making sense. Then it broke. The frustration, confusion, and hurt came out all at once in a way he couldn't contain anymore. Talia tried to reach him from the hallway. "Tate, just wait, something might be going on, okay, we don't know yet." But he wasn't hearing it clearly anymore. 3 days later, when Joey finally managed to get a signal and call through, his voice was exhausted and immediate with apology. "Tate, I'm so sorry, there was a full communication outage, we couldn't reach anyone, we were stuck and—" "No," Tate cut in sharply. "Tate, listen to me." "I don't want to hear it," he said, voice shaking but firm, "just stop." Joey's tone softened, urgent. "I know you're upset, but I need you to understand I didn't just—" "You didn't come," Tate said, "that's what I understand." "Tate, please. Don't call me again." There was a pause on the line. "Tate, wait." But Tate had already slammed the phone down. The impact echoed through the room as he yanked the cord from the wall, breathing hard, hands shaking as he stepped back like even the sound of it was too much. Talia rushed in. "Tate, what did you do?" He didn't answer. Tate turned, walked straight past her and went upstairs, slamming his door hard enough that the house seemed to go quiet afterward. Downstairs, Talia stood frozen for a moment, looking at the disconnected phone in disbelief. "I don't even know what just happened," she whispered. Terrence came in behind her, staring at the silence upstairs. Something went very wrong. And for the first time that night, no one had an immediate way to fix it. Noah noticed the shift in Tate immediately. It wasn't just anger, Tate was overwhelmed, the kind that made everything feel unstable and too loud at the same time. Tate didn't explain it, he just reacted. One by one, he took down the framed photos and things that reminded him of family, carefully at first, then more abruptly as the emotions built up. It wasn't random, it was targeted, like he was trying to remove anything that reminded him of the feeling he couldn't hold anymore. Noah stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure whether to interrupt or not. "Tate," he said quietly. Tate didn't look at him. "I don't want to talk," Tate muttered, voice tight. Noah stepped in a little anyway, careful not to crowd him. "I think you're overwhelmed." Tate gave a short, frustrated laugh. "Yeah, no kidding." He set down one of the frames, sharper this time than before, and turned away from it like even looking at it was too much. Joey's portrait was thrown in Tate's closet, abandoned and away from daylight, forgotten. Noah glanced around the room. The things Tate was putting away weren't just objects, they were connections, memories, people, like he was trying to control something inside him by controlling what was visible outside him. "You don't have to do all of this right now," Noah said gently. Tate exhaled hard. "I can't just sit here." "I know," Noah replied, "but breaking everything isn't going to fix what happened either." That made Tate pause for a second. His shoulders rose and fell as he tried to steady his breathing, but it didn't fully settle. Noah didn't move closer, just stayed where he was, so Tate didn't feel cornered. After a moment, Tate grabbed his jacket. "I need to go out," he said. Noah frowned. "Where?" Tate didn't answer, just picked up the baseball bat Joey had once given him from the garage, and hesitated like he wasn't fully sure why he had taken it. "Tate," Noah said more firmly now, "at least tell someone." "I'm fine," Tate said quickly, but it didn't sound convincing. And then he left. Noah stayed behind, standing in the quiet house, the unease settling in his chest as the hours passed without contact. He tried calling, no answer. He tried paging Tate, nothing. He sat near the window, watching the daylight shift, hoping it was just space, not something worse. Because underneath everything, Noah didn't think Tate was trying to destroy anything. He thought Tate was trying to cope with something he didn't have the words for yet. And that was what made it worse, not anger, but how alone it all felt when he couldn't reach him. Tim would sometimes take Tate out to baseball games or other athletic events, trying to give him experiences that felt normal and grounded, even if Tate didn't really connect with sports the way he hoped his nephew would. He would go along, sit beside Tim and watch, but his interest always felt distant, more observational than engaged. Over time, it became clear that sports themselves weren't what held Tate's attention. What mattered to him wasn't the activity or the setting, it was the consistency of the person he felt most connected to. After Joey became more absent due to travel and distance, Tate's focus narrowed further, and Noah became the central figure in his day-to-day emotional world. From an outside perspective, it looked like a preference. From Tate's perspective, it felt like stability. Noah was there consistently. And that predictability became what Tate leaned on most heavily when everything else in his life felt inconsistent or unpredictable. Julia and Tim noticed the shift but didn't push it. They still included Tate when they could, still tried to keep him engaged in family outings, but it was clear that his emotional world had narrowed over time to just a few key connections, especially Noah, while everything else remained secondary or distant. Across Tate's extended family, there was an unspoken awareness of his position within the family structure and the trust that had been built over generations. Parents, uncles, and aunts all understood that Tate stood at the center of the family's long-term legacy, even if it was rarely spoken about directly in everyday conversation. The family fortune was structured through a long-established trust system that traditionally passed through the eldest legitimate male heir line. In the absence of a direct or qualifying successor, the structure allowed for carefully defined contingencies, including the possibility for controlled redistribution or designation of beneficiaries under specific legal conditions. Within the Blue family, it was also understood that certain decisions regarding portions of the wealth, such as charitable contributions or targeted gifts, could be influenced or directed within the framework of the trust, although this had historically been done only in very limited and structured ways, always under oversight and formal approval. In Tate's generation, however, the situation was unique. For the first time in the family's recorded history, the expectations surrounding succession and inheritance felt less fixed and more uncertain, shaped not only by tradition but also by modern legal structures and personal discretion that could allow for adjustments in how assets were ultimately distributed. As a result, discussions among the adults in the family were often careful and indirect when it came to Tate's future role. There was a shared understanding that his eventual position would carry significant responsibility, but also a recognition that outcomes would depend heavily on his choices, his circumstances, and how the trust would ultimately be managed over time. Within Tate's extended family, there was a quiet, long-standing awareness that he represented the future of the family line and its legacy. It wasn't usually spoken about directly in front of him, but it existed in the background of conversations between the adults, an understanding that he carried more expectation than most people his age would ever notice. Over time, it became increasingly clear that many branches of the family were unlikely to continue their lines in traditional ways, whether by choice or circumstance. That reality made the attention on Tate more concentrated, even if no one explicitly said it out loud in his presence. Joey, in particular, often pushed back against the more rigid expectations of the family. He didn't speak about legacy in the same way the older generation did, and he tended to focus more on Tate as a person rather than what he represented to the family structure. Still, the weight of expectation lingered in subtle ways. Tate could sense it in certain conversations he overheard, in the way adults would pause or change topics when he entered a room, or in the careful language used when discussing his future. As he got older, it became something he understood more clearly, not as something he had asked for, but as something that had been placed around him by history, tradition, and circumstance. In Tate's family, marriages were often treated as matters of strategy instead of emotion, shaped by status, alliances, and long-standing tradition. People were expected to consider compatibility in terms of wealth, reputation, and family standing, and decisions were rarely made without careful thought about long-term consequences for the family's position. When Tate was younger, none of that meant much to him. It was just the background noise of adult conversations he didn't fully understand or pay attention to. As he entered his teenage years, however, the expectations started to become clearer. His mother would occasionally explain fragments of the family's history, stories about how important lineage and continuity had once been to the older generations, and how seriously those decisions were treated in the past. Tate didn't always know how to process it. On one hand, it felt distant and almost unreal, like something that belonged to another world. He could sense that people looked at him differently because of it, as if certain expectations had already been assigned to him long before he ever had a say in them. Over time, it became just another quiet pressure in the background of his life, present but not fully understood, shaping conversations he was only beginning to recognize as significant. Tim liked Tate and genuinely enjoyed his nephew's company, but Tate never seemed to form deep bonds with most people outside of brief interactions, with Noah being the main exception. Joey's relationship with Tate, however, had become increasingly strained over time, and by the time Tate was a teenager, the distance between them had grown into something consistent and difficult to bridge. They rarely spent time together anymore unless it turned into arguments or tense exchanges, with neither side fully able to understand the other's expectations or frustrations. Tate himself often came across as defiant and argumentative, pushing back against authority figures and resisting attempts to guide or correct him. Beneath that, though, he wasn't a happy or settled person in most environments. His mood and behavior shifted depending on who was around him and how safe or understood he felt in the moment. With Noah, however, there was a noticeable difference. Around him, Tate seemed more at ease, more engaged and less combative, as if the constant pressure he felt elsewhere eased slightly in Noah's presence. Talia often noticed this contrast and, because of it, wasn't as worried about him slipping into a more serious emotional decline, even if she still had concerns about his temper and difficulty managing relationships. As Tate grew from 13 to 18, Talia noticed that he was far more physically affectionate than she would have expected for a boy his age. The affection, however, was reserved almost entirely for Noah. He was always finding a way to be close to him. Tate would greet Noah with lingering hugs, instinctively reach for his hand, or sit with their shoulders pressed together. More than once, Talia caught Tate resting his cheek against Noah's, perfectly content to remain that way for several quiet moments. Whenever they relaxed together, one of them often ended up with his head resting in the other's lap while they talked, read, or watched television. At bedtime, they would sleep side by side, leaving scarcely an inch of space between them, as though neither of them thought twice about the closeness. Talia found the level of physical affection unusual for teenage boys, yet it appeared entirely natural to Tate and Noah. It was simply how they expressed comfort, trust, and familiarity with one another. For a time, Talia wondered if her son had simply been in love. It seemed like the easiest explanation. But as the years passed, she abandoned that idea. Tate had never struck her as a romantic person. If anything, he treated romance and falling in love as things to be avoided at all costs, as though they were dangerous traps rather than dreams worth chasing. The very thought of emotional vulnerability seemed to make him uncomfortable. And yet whatever existed between Tate and Noah defied every category she knew. It wasn't a romance, it wasn't an ordinary friendship, it wasn't sexual, nor was it simply brotherly. Their bond existed somewhere outside the usual language people used to describe relationships. They were fiercely attached to one another, deeply dependent on each other's presence, yet neither of them ever seemed able or willing to define what they were. Years later, Susie reached the same conclusion. Even after knowing Tate for years, she could never truly decipher what he felt for Noah. Whatever lived inside Tate's heart remained known only to Tate himself, a mystery that resisted every attempt to explain it. Even so, Tate's pattern with most people remained consistent. He argued, resisted, and challenged others frequently, especially when he felt misunderstood or controlled, making his relationships with adults and extended family increasingly complicated as he got older. As Tate got older, teachers increasingly found him difficult to manage in structured environments. It wasn't that he ignored everything outright, but when he felt challenged or pushed into something he didn't agree with, he would push back hard and immediately question the authority behind the instruction. In school classroom settings, this often led to tense exchanges. "Tate, you need to put your comic book away," one teacher said firmly, standing near his desk. Tate didn't look up right away. "Why, I'm done with the work." "You're not done," the teacher replied. "There's still the final section." Tate leaned back in his chair. "I don't need it." The teacher sighed. "It's required for everyone." Tate frowned slightly. "Says who?" "The school," she answered, trying to stay calm. "And I'm asking you to follow the instructions." Tate shook his head. "You can't make me do something just because you say so." The teacher paused, choosing her words carefully. This isn't a negotiation, it's a classroom rule. Tate's expression tightened. Rules don't matter if they don't make sense. From across the room, another teacher stepped in quietly. Tate, just finish the assignment, then you're done. I already am done, he insisted. No, you're avoiding it, the first teacher said. Tate stood up abruptly. I'm not avoiding anything, I just don't see the point. Tate, the second teacher said more firmly now, sit down. For a moment he did, but his frustration was obvious. He tapped his foot, restless, visibly irritated by the expectation being placed on him. I don't get why you keep doing this, he said. It's not like this matters. It matters because it's the curriculum, the teacher replied, and because you need to follow instructions. Tate scoffed, you act like you're in charge of everything. I am in charge of this classroom, she said firmly. Tate shook his head, you're not in charge of me. That line shifted the tone in the room immediately. A third staff member stepped closer. Tate, that kind of language isn't appropriate. I'm just saying the truth, he shot back. The teacher exhaled slowly. No one is trying to control you personally, we're trying to help you complete your work. Tate stood again, this time more sharply, I don't need help. A long pause followed as the teachers exchanged looks, clearly trying to decide the best way forward without escalating the situation further. Eventually, one of them spoke again, more measured. Tate, you're going to stay here until you finish the assignment, that's the expectation. Tate looked at them for a moment, then sat back down, but not calmly, still tense, still resisting internally even if he wasn't speaking anymore. The teachers, meanwhile, lowered their voices once he stopped arguing, already aware that forcing the issue too hard would only make the cycle repeat later. On the first day of grade 1, Tate had been placed in the back of the classroom while Noah was seated near the front. The separation didn't sit well with him from the moment he realized it. Tate, this is your seat, the teacher said, gesturing calmly toward the back row. No, Tate replied immediately, already looking toward Noah. This is where you'll be sitting, she repeated more firmly. Tate didn't argue with words that time, he simply walked up toward the front of the room. Tate, stop, the teacher called out, but he ignored her. A boy sitting next to Noah looked up, confused, just as Tate reached the desk. Move, Tate said bluntly. The boy hesitated, but this is my. Before he could finish, Tate shoved past him enough to take the seat, forcing the situation rather than asking. That's not okay, the teacher said sharply, stepping forward. Tate, you do not push other students. I'm sitting here, Tate said, crossing his arms. No, you're not, she replied. You need to go back to your assigned seat right now. I'm not sitting back there, Tate shot back. I'm sitting with him. That is not your choice, she said, trying to stay composed. You need to stand up. No, Tate said again. The room had gone completely quiet. After a long moment, the teacher straightened. All right, Tate, you're going to the principal's office. Tate smirked slightly. Fine. In the principal's office, Tate sat in the chair, swinging his legs slightly, a faint grin still on his face, like he didn't take the situation seriously at all. The principal folded his hands on the desk. Do you understand why you're here? Tate shrugged, because I sat in the wrong seat. You pushed another student, the principal corrected. Tate let out a small snicker. He was in my seat. It wasn't your seat, the principal said calmly, and even if it were, pushing is not acceptable. Tate leaned back. He could have just moved. That's not how we handle things, the principal replied. Tate didn't respond, just looked around the office like he was bored. A few minutes later, Talia arrived, clearly concerned. What happened? She asked, looking between the principal and Tate. The principal gestured slightly. Tate had difficulty following seating instructions and became physical with another student. Talia's expression shifted. Tate, is that true? Tate shrugged again. I wanted to sit with Noah. That doesn't mean you can push someone, she said, her tone firm but controlled. They put me in the back, Tate replied, like that explained everything. That's not an excuse, Talia said. You still have to follow rules. Tate smirked faintly again. It's a dumb rule. Tate, the principal said more firmly now, this is not a joke. I'm not joking, Tate replied, though the edge of amusement was still there. Talia sighed, rubbing her temple slightly. Why is this funny to you? Tate looked at her. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, she said. You hurt someone and disrupted the class. I didn't hurt him, Tate said dismissively. 2 days later, Tate was caught paying another student to switch seats with him. Without a word, he pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket and waved it in front of the bewildered boy. The student eagerly accepted the money, gathered his belongings, and moved to the back of the classroom. Before the lesson could even begin, the teacher noticed what had happened. Tate, return to your assigned seat. No. You cannot buy another student's seat. I already did. When Tate refused to move, the teacher sent him straight to the principal's office. Later that afternoon, Talia arrived at the school to collect him. As soon as they were alone, she turned to him. Tate, she said calmly, where did you get a $100 bill? Tate stared out the car window. Did your father give it to you? No answer. Did you take it from somewhere? Silence. Tate, I'm asking you a simple question. He remained completely expressionless, refusing to say a single word. No matter how many times Talia asked, he never explained where the money had come from. After several minutes of silence, Tate finally spoke, still staring out the car window. Uncle Joey gave it to me for my last birthday. Talia glanced at him but said nothing, letting him continue. I just wanted to use my birthday money to sit where I'm most comfortable. Tate folded his arms and frowned. It doesn't matter where that boy sits, he didn't care, he was happy to take the money. He let out an exasperated sigh. I just wanted to sit near my buddy. Tate's lower lip jutted out in a pout as he looked at his mother. Why does everything at school have to be so difficult? That's not the point, the principal replied. You made the classroom unsafe. Even if the boy accepted the cash, that's not how we do things in the homeroom. Tate rolled his eyes slightly at the principal, irritated that moving seats was such a big deal to these adults. It's just a seat. It's about behavior, the principal said. Talia crouched slightly in front of him so he had to look at her. You don't get to decide which rules apply to you. Tate didn't respond right away. You have to listen, she continued, even when you don't like it. Tate looked away. I'm not sitting away from Noah. That's not your decision, she said again. The principal leaned forward slightly. We're going to give you another chance, but if this happens again, there will be consequences. Tate gave a small dismissive shrug. Talia stood back up, clearly frustrated now. This isn't optional, Tate. Still, he didn't fully engage, just sat there, quiet now but not convinced. The adults exchanged a glance, already aware that this wasn't going to be a one-time issue but the beginning of a much longer pattern. Tate finally said it out loud, his voice blunt and unfiltered. I don't want to sit back there, he said. The poor kids sit back there, I don't want to be seen around them, they smell. The room went still. Talia's face flushed immediately. Tate. He looked at her like he didn't understand the reaction. What, it's true. No, she said sharply, stepping closer. That is not how you talk about less fortunate people. Tate frowned. I'm just saying. I know exactly what you're saying, she cut in, her voice firm but controlled, and it's wrong. The principal shifted slightly in his chair, watching closely but letting Talia handle it. You don't judge people like that, Talia continued. Ever, do you understand me? Tate crossed his arms again. I just don't want to sit back there. That's not the point, she said. You don't get to decide someone's worth based on where they sit or what they have. Tate looked away, clearly frustrated. I didn't say they were bad. You implied it, she replied, and that matters. He didn't answer. Talia took a breath, steadying herself. Think about Noah. That made Tate glance back at her. You care about him, right? She said. Yeah, he answered quickly. Then listen carefully, she said. Noah doesn't come from money, he doesn't have what you have, and you've never once treated him like he's less than you. Tate hesitated. That's different. No, it's not, she said firmly. It's exactly the same, the only difference is how you're choosing to see it. The principal nodded slightly. Respect isn't selective, Tate. Tate's jaw tightened but he didn't argue right away. Talia softened her tone just slightly. You don't have to like every situation, but you do have to treat people with respect. Tate looked down at the floor for a moment, quieter now. After a pause he muttered, I still don't want to sit back there. Talia sighed, but her voice stayed steady. You might not want to, but you're going to, and you're going to do it without putting other people down. Tate didn't respond, but the defiance had shifted, less loud now, more internal. The principal leaned forward slightly. We'll give you another chance to go back to class and try again. Tate shrugged faintly, still not fully convinced, but no longer arguing the same way. Talia gave him one last look. We'll talk more about this at home. Tate didn't meet her eyes, but he stood up anyway, the situation no longer a joke, even if he wasn't ready to admit it out loud. Tate shook his head so quickly it was almost defensive. Noah's not poor, he said firmly. He doesn't live in a trailer park, he lives with me. Talia raised an eyebrow but let him continue. He shares my bed, my clothes, my food, Tate said matter-of-factly. What's mine is his. After a brief pause he added with complete certainty, he shares my trust fund too. Tate looked at his mother as though the answer should have been obvious. So he's not poor. Talia looked at her son with a gentle expression. Tate, without your generosity, kindness your family and others have shown him, Noah's circumstances would likely be very different. She paused before continuing. He came from very little. If people hadn't stepped in to help, he might still be living in that trailer, struggling with poverty. Talia smiled softly. That may be true, Talia said gently, but there is something you must always remember. She waited until Tate met her eyes. Never make Noah feel as though he's a charity case, a guest, or somehow less important because of where he came from. Do you understand? Tate nodded. He is a member of our household. He may not legally be a member of the Blue family, but while he is under our roof, he deserves the same respect, kindness, and consideration as anyone else. She rested a hand on his shoulder. I want Noah to feel that we're fortunate to have him in our lives, not that he's fortunate simply because we have money. Tate listened quietly. Your father and I have the financial means to give Noah opportunities he might not otherwise have had, Talia continued. That's a privilege, not a reason to look down on him. True generosity is given freely without making the other person feel indebted or inferior. She smiled warmly. Character matters far more than wealth, Tate. Always treat Noah with dignity and respect. If you do that, our kindness will mean something far greater than the money we've spent. Tate gave a small nod. I understand, Mom. Talia looked at Tate for a long moment before speaking. We do not treat people with fewer advantages as though they deserve any less dignity than we would want for ourselves if we ever lost everything. She folded her hands in her lap. You are our only biological child, Tate. Your father and I have been blessed with financial security, and that gives us the opportunity to be generous. But generosity is never about proving that you have more than someone else. It's about recognizing another person's worth. She smiled softly. That little blonde boy you brought home and loved deserves the same opportunities you've enjoyed simply because of the family you were born into. A person's circumstances don't determine their value. Her expression grew more serious. And there's something else I want you to think about. If you refuse to sit in the back of the classroom because you think it's beneath you, what message does that send to Noah? He comes from poverty and a working-class background. Those students are his peers. If you act as though they're somehow beneath you, you're also insulting where Noah came from. She leaned forward. So you'll stay in your assigned seat. You'll be grateful that you're receiving an education, and you'll treat every classmate with the same respect, regardless of how much money their family has. Talia waited. Do you understand? Tate lowered his eyes for a moment before giving a slow, reluctant nod. Yes, Mom, he said quietly. Noah didn't escape those circumstances because he was lucky, Talia explained. He escaped them because caring neighbors, good friends, and people who believed in him gave him opportunities. They saw his potential and chose to help him build a better future. Tate frowned, unconvinced. Maybe, he muttered, but now he lives with me. He's my buddy, and as long as I'm around, he'll never have to worry about being poor again. Talia shook her head, unable to believe her son. Tate believed poor children were beneath him. He didn't want to even be near poor kids, regardless of the children's circumstances. Don't divide people. Noah's the same person no matter where he lives. Tate looked down, quieter now but still unsure. I didn't mean it like that. "I know," she said, "but it came out that way and words matter." The principal added calmly, "Part of being here is learning how to treat everyone with respect, regardless of background." Tate stayed quiet, confusion clear in his eyes. Throughout the first several grades of school, Tate cycled in and out of the principal's office for a wide range of incidents, most of them centered around ignoring rules, challenging authority, or escalating small disagreements into larger classroom disruptions. His parents were frequently called in to meet with staff, and each meeting focused on finding ways to help him adjust more successfully to structured environments. By the time he was around 8 years old, the school began raising additional concerns after repeated incidents involving inappropriate classroom behavior related to how he handled personal boundaries and clothing rules. These situations prompted more formal meetings with his parents, where staff emphasized the need for clearer boundaries, consistent consequences, and closer coordination between home and school to prevent further escalation. Despite repeated interventions, Tate's behavior patterns remained difficult to shift, and the school continued to document concerns as they tried different strategies to support him while maintaining classroom stability for other students. When Tate was about 9 years old in 3rd grade, he was sent to the principal's office for a dress code violation because he took off his clothes, streaking across the classroom after refusing to follow the school's clothing requirements for the day. The teacher had already tried redirecting him multiple times in class, but Tate remained insistent and uncooperative, which led to the referral. Talia was called to the school shortly after. In the principal's office, the atmosphere was firm but controlled. Tate sat in the chair with his arms crossed, clearly irritated but not fully engaged with the seriousness of the situation yet. Talia arrived a few minutes later, looking concerned as she entered. "What happened this time?" she asked immediately, glancing between Tate and the principal. The principal opened a file on his desk. "We had an issue today involving dress code noncompliance." Talia turned to Tate. "Tate." He shrugged. "It's fine." "It's not fine if you were sent here," she replied firmly. The principal continued. Tate refused to follow repeated instructions from his teacher regarding appropriate school attire when redirected. He argued and continued to disregard the requirement. Tate removed all of his clothing and underwear during English class. He did it as a joke in front of the other students. We immediately sent him to the principal's office because we can't have kids doing that kind of thing. Talia exhaled slowly. "Tate, why didn't you just follow the rule?" Tate frowned. "I didn't like it." "That's not a reason," she said. "It is to me," he muttered. The principal leaned forward slightly. "Tate, rules like this are not optional, they apply to everyone in the school." Tate looked away. "It doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter," Talia said more firmly now. "You don't get to decide which rules you follow." Tate shifted in his seat. "It's just clothes." "It's not just clothes in a school setting," the principal replied. "It's about consistency and expectations." Talia rubbed her forehead briefly. "This is becoming a pattern." The principal nodded. "We've seen repeated resistance to classroom structure and school rules. This is part of that same behavior pattern." Tate crossed his arms tighter. "Everyone keeps making a big deal out of nothing." "It is a big deal when it disrupts the classroom," Talia said. "Other kids have to learn too." Tate didn't respond to questions. The meeting ended with a formal warning and a request for closer coordination between home and school, while Talia left with Tate, clearly aware that this was becoming an ongoing issue rather than a one-time incident. When Tate was in junior high, Talia was brought in for meetings as well, where staff tried to separate concerns about behavior management from assumptions about Noah and Tate's odd relationship. "They're very attached to each other," one counselor noted carefully. "We just need to make sure Tate is able to function independently in group settings." Talia nodded. "They've always been close, but I understand what you're saying." At home, she spoke with Tate about boundaries and school expectations. "You can be buddies," she told him, "but you still have to follow classroom rules." Tate frowned. "It's easier when he's there." "I know," she said, "but you need to learn how to manage even when things aren't exactly how you want them." Tate didn't argue much, but he didn't fully agree either. And at school, the pattern continued, less about defiance than about attachment, routine, and the difficulty of separating closeness from structure in an environment that required constant independence. Tate began to become more restless in junior high, especially between classes. Instead of moving directly to his next period like he was supposed to, he would sometimes wander the halls, linger in stairwells, or spend time talking when he was expected to be in class. Teachers started noticing that he was frequently not where he was supposed to be during periods and occasionally missed portions of class entirely. "Tate, you need to be in your next class," a hallway supervisor would call out when spotting him near the lockers. "I'm going," he'd reply, but without much urgency. Over time, these patterns led to more frequent office referrals and meetings with administration. In one meeting, the assistant principal reviewed attendance notes. "We're seeing repeated absences during instructional time," she said. "Not full-day truancy, but enough missed class time that it's becoming a concern." Talia frowned. "Tate, are you leaving class?" "I just don't like how long it takes to switch," he said. "That's not an excuse," she replied gently but firmly. "It's boring," Tate added. The assistant principal leaned forward. "Junior high has a very structured schedule. You're expected to be in class when the bell rings." Tate shrugged. "It's not that serious." "It is serious," Talia said. "You're responsible for being where you're supposed to be." Tate didn't respond, just looked away, clearly unconcerned in the moment but still hearing the consequences being laid out. The school began increasing supervision during transitions, and staff made notes to ensure he was accounted for more consistently between periods. At 14, Tate was sent to the principal's office after a teacher noticed his eyes were red, swollen, and unfocused during class. He had been unusually distracted, missing instructions and leaving assignments incomplete in a way that stood out sharply from his usual behavior patterns. The teacher reported Tate being high immediately, and the school administration responded quickly, treating it as a serious concern. Talia and Terrence were called to the school, and Noah was also asked to attend the meeting. In the principal's office, the atmosphere was heavy and formal. Tate sat in one chair, slouched slightly, avoiding eye contact. Noah sat nearby, quiet but clearly uneasy. Talia stood with her arms folded tightly, while Terrence kept his posture rigid, focused on the principal. The principal began carefully. "We've had a significant concern today regarding Tate's condition during school hours. He was observed with impaired focus, red, swollen eyes, and difficulty following basic classroom instructions." Talia turned immediately. "Tate, what happened?" Tate shrugged. "Nothing happened." Terrence's voice sharpened. "That's not what we're hearing from the school." "I was fine," Tate insisted. The principal continued calmly. "Based on staff observations, we made the decision to remove Tate from class and bring him to the office for assessment. This is a serious matter." Talia exhaled slowly. "Are you saying he was unsafe to be in class?" "I'm saying he was not in a condition to participate appropriately in the learning environment," the principal replied. The word suspension came next. "Based on Tate's physical and visual impairment, it seems your son was high on some stimulant or drug. We did a drug test on the young man and he had high doses of alkyl nitrites in his system. We are suspending Tate pending further review and a meeting with a support plan in place before he returns." The room went still. Talia's head lifted sharply. "Suspended." "Yes," the principal confirmed. "This is not a punishment alone, it is a response to a safety and conduct concern." Terrence turned toward Tate. "Do you understand how serious this is?" Tate stood laughing uncontrollably. His eyes wandered around the room as he reached into the air, trying to touch things that weren't really there. "Look," he giggled, "there are so many of you." He blinked repeatedly, his gaze drifting between his parents as though he couldn't focus on a single face. Talia and Terrence exchanged horrified looks. Their son's behavior was so unlike him that neither of them knew what to say. "Tate," Terrence said firmly, "look at me." Tate only smiled dreamily and stretched out a hand toward the empty air, completely detached from what was happening around him. Beside them, Noah watched with growing alarm. "What's wrong with him?" Noah asked quietly. "I've never seen him act like this." Neither parent answered immediately. The school administrator explained that staff believed Tate had inhaled alkyl nitrites, also called poppers, a recreational drug, shortly before class. Noah stared in stunned silence. He had never heard of the substance before and had no idea what it was, only that whatever Tate had taken had left him confused, disoriented, and behaving in a way that frightened everyone who cared about him. Talia stepped closer to her son, her voice trembling. We're taking you home, Tate. He looked at her, still smiling faintly, unaware of the fear reflected on every face around him. Tate looked away. It's just school, I'll be fine. No, Talia said firmly, you won't just be fine if this keeps happening. What is going on with you? I already said nothing, Tate replied, more defensive now. Noah finally spoke quietly but clearly, you weren't acting like yourself. Tate glanced at him, don't start. I'm not starting anything, Noah said, I'm telling the truth. The principal held up a hand slightly. We are not here to argue, we are here to address what staff observed and determine how to move forward safely. Terrence leaned forward, what do you need from us? A structured plan, the principal said. Clear expectations, monitoring, and cooperation from home. Your son is high, Mrs. Blue. I can tell by his eyes that he's under the influence of an illegal drug. I searched his person with a nurse present. He doesn't have it on him, but he's definitely high due to our no-tolerance policy. If it happens again, we'll have to involve the police. You need to talk to Tate about being under the influence and how dangerous it is, especially if other kids see a popular boy like him doing this. They're more likely to do it too. Talia nodded slowly, though she looked exhausted. I'm so sorry, we will address this at home. Tate let out a short laugh under his breath. This is ridiculous. Talia turned to him immediately. No, Tate, this is what happens when you don't communicate or take responsibility for what's going on right now. Silence followed. The principal closed the file in front of him. For now, Tate will be suspended. We will schedule a return meeting before he is allowed back on campus. Tate stood first this time and said sarcastically, great. Tate, Terrence said sharply. But Tate was already moving toward the door. Talia followed him with her eyes. We're not done talking about this. I am. Tate touched his crotch very suggestively as he walked out the door. The principal looked away from what Tate was doing, then he turned back to the parents, thanking them for their time. Noah stayed seated for a moment longer, watching Tate leave, knowing this was no longer just a school issue, but something that had shifted into something heavier, more complicated, and harder for any of them to ignore. Noah remembered how much he and Tate loved pizza, how something so simple had felt like the beginning of everything. The first night he stayed over at Tate's house in 1972, the air had been thick with a quiet kind of excitement neither of them quite knew how to name. The smell of melted cheese and warm dough filled the kitchen as Talia set the pizza box down on the counter, smiling faintly at the two boys hovering nearby. Careful, it's hot, she said, sliding it toward Tate. Tate barely acknowledged her, already focused on Noah. You sit, he insisted, pulling out a chair with a kind of urgency that felt almost too big for such a small moment. I'll get it. Noah laughed softly. It's just pizza, Tate. I know, Tate replied quickly, almost defensively, as if that somehow mattered. Just sit. There had been two kinds. Pineapple, Noah's favorite, and pepperoni with sausage, which Tate had chosen with a quiet confidence, like he wanted to share something of himself too. Tate opened the box carefully, the steam rising between them, and began arranging slices onto a plate instead of just handing the box over. You don't have to, Noah started. I want to, Tate interrupted, his voice softer now, almost careful. Talia leaned against the doorway, watching. She'd seen her son with kids his age before, loud, careless, distracted, but this was different. Tate moved as if everything mattered, like Noah mattered. Here, Tate said, setting the plate in front of him, try this one first, it's better when it's really hot. Noah took a bite, smiling immediately. Okay, yeah, that's really good. Tate's shoulders relaxed just a little, like he'd been waiting for that approval. He grabbed his own slice but didn't eat right away, watching Noah instead. You like the pineapple one more though, right? Tate asked. Noah nodded, reaching for it. Yeah, but I'll eat both. Good, Tate said quickly, we can share. They ended up trading slices back and forth without thinking, Tate pushing the pineapple pieces closer to Noah, Noah nudging the pepperoni toward Tate. It wasn't planned, just instinctive, as they'd already figured out a rhythm neither of them had to explain. Talia noticed everything, the way Tate refilled Noah's drink before his own, the way he leaned in whenever Noah spoke, the way his attention never drifted. It wasn't just politeness. It was a focus, care, something deeper she couldn't quite put into words. I've never seen you play host like this, she teased lightly. Tate flushed. Mom. What? She smiled. You're doing a good job. Noah looked between them, amused. He's being really nice. I'm always nice, Tate muttered. Joey walked through the living room carrying a large box of freshly baked supreme pizza, the aroma filling the house. As he passed through, he spotted the two boys laughing so hard they could barely catch their breath. You two little rascals, he said with an amused grin, shaking his head. Tate and Noah only giggled louder. Joey chuckled to himself and continued through the house, sliding open the glass patio door and stepping outside toward the pool. Talia raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, she just watched a little longer, something thoughtful settling in her expression. Because she knew her son, and she had never seen him look at anyone the way he was looking at Noah now. Like every small thing mattered, like this moment, pizza, laughter, and shared glances was something he wanted to hold on to for as long as he could. Tate loved eating by the pool. The soft breeze drifting through the yard and the gentle, rhythmic sounds of water lapping against the sides always seemed to settle something inside him, loosening the tight edges of his thoughts. Out here, everything felt easier, lighter. He carried their plates outside with an easy confidence, setting them down on the patio table before glancing back at Noah, who lingered just a step behind, taking it all in, without much warning, and with a grin that flashed a more playful side of him. Tate grabbed Noah by the wrist and pulled him toward the pool. Wait, Tate! Noah barely got out before Tate laughed and tossed him into the shallow 3-foot end, clearly choosing it because he wasn't entirely sure Noah could swim. Water splashed up in a wide arc, soaking the edge of the patio, and Uncle Joey, drawing a surprised gasp from Noah as he resurfaced, sputtering, his hair plastered to his forehead. For a split second there was silence, then Noah's expression shifted, something bold and mischievous sparking in his eyes. Oh, you're dead, he said, pushing wet hair out of his face. Tate barely had time to react before Noah lunged forward, grabbing him and yanking him straight into the water. The splash this time was louder, messier, Tate going under completely before bursting back up, laughing, really laughing, the kind that came from deep in his chest and didn't hold back. From the patio, Talia watched it all unfold, her arms loosely crossed but her expression soft with surprise. She had seen Tate happy before, sure, but this was different. He wasn't guarded or controlled, he was alive in a way that caught her off guard. And Noah, this kid with thrift store clothes and a quiet way about him, was right there in the middle of it, completely unafraid, matching Tate's energy, pulling something genuine out of him. As Noah dunked Tate under again, both of them laughing and shoving at each other in the shallow water, Talia shook her head slightly, a small smile forming. Somehow, in the span of a single afternoon, this boy had reached a place in Tate she hadn't seen anyone else touch. These memories of how their bond developed kept Noah warm in a way nothing else could. From shared lunches at a wobbly preschool table to pizza nights, poolside laughter, and sleepovers where Tate had looked at him like he mattered more than anything else in the room, it had always felt steady, safe in a way Noah hadn't known before. Tate's devotion had never really wavered. It showed in every small, instinctive act of care, in the way he paid attention like Noah was something important he didn't want to lose track of. Somewhere along the way, Noah's feelings had shifted into something heavier, more complicated, and then everything had started to unravel. He'd pulled back, unsure how to hold what he felt without breaking it. Tate had noticed immediately, and when Noah began to drift toward other people, other possibilities, it left Tate frustrated, confused, and quietly hurt in a way neither of them fully said out loud. Noah remembered the drive to Tate's house in 1972 for that first sleepover with a kind of sharp clarity that never really faded. The car smelled faintly of stale coffee and something chemical, and the engine made that low, uneven hum that filled in the silence between them. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his small overnight bag clutched tightly in his lap, as if holding on to it might somehow keep everything else steady, too. For a while his mom didn't say anything. She just drove, eyes fixed on the road, jaw set. I remember the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the drive over. I kept pressing my fingers into the fabric of my overnight bag, as if I held on tight enough I could keep myself from falling apart. The car smelled like stale coffee and something sharp and chemical, and the hum of the engine filled every silence my mom didn't bother to fill with kindness. She didn't look at me for most of it, she just drove like I was another errand she needed to complete. Then, without warning, she spoke. Listen to me carefully. My back straightened before I even meant it to. Okay. You are going into a house that matters, she said, like she was reading off a warning label. People know that family, they talk about them, they remember them. I nodded fast, even though she wasn't watching. I know. No, she cut in. You don't. That's when I stopped breathing properly. She finally glanced at me just for a second and it felt like being evaluated instead of seen. You don't talk too much, you don't interrupt, you don't ask for anything unless they offer it, and when they do, you say thank you like you mean it. I will, I said, because there wasn't anything else I could say. And don't touch anything that isn't yours, she continued. Don't wander, don't make noise, the best thing you can do is stay out of the way. Stay out of the way, I repeated, quieter than I meant to. Yes, she snapped, be quiet, be polite, be invisible if you have to. The word hit harder than the rest of it, invisible, like that was something I could become if I tried hard enough. What if they want me to talk? I asked after a moment, my voice smaller than I liked. Then you answer with short, direct responses, she said. Briefly, nobody likes a kid who doesn't know when to stop gabbing. I nodded again, even though I wasn't sure what too much even meant yet. The houses started changing after that, bigger, cleaner, farther apart. Everything looked like it belonged to someone who knew exactly where they fit in the world. I didn't. I'll be good, I said, because it felt like the only thing I could offer. You better be, she replied immediately, because boys like you don't get second chances in places like this. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, she said slower now like she wanted me to feel it, that if you make a bad impression, that's it, people talk, and once they decide what you are, they don't change their minds. I turned that over in my head, trying to find a version of myself that wouldn't get decided against. I won't mess it up, I said. You say that now, she muttered. Just don't embarrass me or yourself. The Blues are old money. I read somewhere that their family goes back 700 years, even to the old country where they lived in Europe before immigrating to the U.S. They are the wealthiest, most affluent family in California, probably on the entire Pacific coast. If you charm them, you might just get into a good college or achieve a letter of recommendation. Say the wrong thing, and you'll never get a job in this state. Make me proud or don't come home. After that, there wasn't much left to say. Just the road and the tightening in my chest and the feeling that I was already doing something wrong without knowing what it was. Do you think they'll like me? I asked, even though I didn't really expect an answer I could hold onto. That depends on you, she said. So I looked out the window instead. The house got closer and closer until it felt unreal, too large, too perfect, like I was about to step into a place I didn't belong inside of. I remember thinking I should disappear before I even got there, I thought. But then the car stopped, and before I could even decide how to breathe, the door was already opening. Tate was there, running, not slow, not careful, just straight toward me like I was something he had been waiting for, and for the first time that entire day I forgot what invisible was supposed to feel like. Tate reaches me before I've even fully unbuckled my seatbelt. The moment the door opens, he's there, hands already on me like it's the most natural thing in the world. You came, he says, like he's surprised I actually showed up. I said I would, I manage, but my voice feels weird in my throat. He doesn't let me finish. He just grabs my wrist and pulls me out of the car like he's been waiting all day for this exact moment. My duffel bag slides against the seat as I stumble after him and my sleeping bag nearly falls off my shoulder. Tate, wait, I start, but he's already laughing. You're slow, he says, like it's a fact he's known forever. I'm carrying stuff, I shoot back, trying not to trip on the curb. That doesn't count, he says immediately like it's obvious. I finally steady myself on the driveway, both bags in my hands now, and I realize he's still holding onto my wrist like he forgot to let go. Not tight, just there, like I might disappear if he doesn't. Behind us, the car door shuts. My mom is already talking before I can even turn around fully. A man who looks just like Tate but older stands next to Talia. Make sure to listen, she says. Tate's mom appears in the doorway at the same time, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She's calm in a way that makes everything feel slower, like she's used to chaos but doesn't let it stick to her. Oh, he will be fine, she says politely, offering a small smile. My mom doesn't smile back. I told him very clearly he needs to behave, no trouble, he follows rules very well, he understands expectations. I flinch a little at the way she says it, like I'm not standing right here. Talia, Tate's mom, nods gently. Of course, we'll make sure he's comfortable. My mom finally looks at me again. Noah, you heard me in the car. Yes, I say quickly. Say it. My stomach tightens. I heard you, I'll behave, I'll listen. Good, she says sharply as that settles it. There's a pause where no one moves except Tate, who's still holding my wrist like I might get pulled back into the car if he lets go. Tate looks between us. Can he just come inside now? I almost laugh, but I don't. My mom exhales like she's already done with this whole moment. Yes, go on. Behave, Uncle Joey smiles. But before I can even step forward, she adds one more thing. And Noah. I look back. Don't embarrass me. It's quiet, but it lands heavily anyway. I won't, I say again, even though I'm not sure how I'm supposed to guarantee that. Tate tugs my arm lightly. Come on, he says like none of that matters. I follow him up the walkway, my duffel bag bumping against my leg and my sleeping bag slipping a little off my shoulder. I adjust it awkwardly, trying to keep up. Tate glances at me. You brought like everything, he says. It's one night, I reply. And he says like that explains nothing. We reach the door and he finally lets go of my wrist, but only so he can open it first, like it's his job to make sure I go in properly. Behind us, I hear my mom one last time. Remember what I said, she calls. I remember, I say without turning around. Talia gives her a polite nod. We'll take good care of him. Terrence, Tate's father, was supposed to be here, but he's out of town for a few hours in San Diego at a business meeting. He'll be back at around 11 tonight. It's just going to be me, Joey, and the kids. Then the door closes behind us and the sound of the outside world disappears all at once. Inside, everything feels warmer. Tate immediately turns to me like I'm the most important thing in the room. Okay, he says, like we're about to start something exciting. You're here now. And for the first time all day, I believe him more than I believe anything else. Tate's mattress shifted under us that night, and immediately I noticed it, how it didn't sag or creak or fight back like the ones I knew. It just held us perfectly balanced, like it had been engineered for comfort instead of convenience. It wasn't just soft in the normal way people mean when they say that. It had weight and structure underneath the softness, like it cost more attention than I'd ever been given in my life. I remember thinking I'd never actually felt a real mattress before that moment. Everything about it was different. No uneven dips, no thin springs poking through, no scratchy cover pulling at the skin. It absorbed my weight so completely that it almost made me feel weightless, like I was being supported instead of just lying down. I didn't have a mattress at home, but a pull-out futon that was twin-sized that gently lay on the floor of the trailer. I never slept in a bed like this. It felt weird, but a good kind of different. The sheets were even worse in the best way. They weren't the kind of sheets I knew from thrift stores or discount sets that pill after a few washes. These were Egyptian cotton, smooth and cool and heavy at the same time, like they had density to them. I later learned people called it high thread count, but at the time all I knew was that they felt impossibly fine against my skin, like something you were supposed to be careful with just by touching it. The pillow I sank into wasn't flat or lumpy or overused. It actually held its shape, molding gently instead of collapsing. I remember pressing my hand into it just to see if it would bounce back, and it did, immediately, perfectly. There was a super long single pillow on Tate's bed and we shared it together. Above me, the duvet was a deep navy blue, thick and perfectly stitched in clean, invisible lines that ran across it like quiet structure. It wasn't just a blanket. It was heavy enough to feel secure, but soft enough to make everything underneath it feel insulated from the rest of the world. It looked like something that didn't come from a store you just walked into. It looked chosen, curated, like someone had decided comfort was something worth investing in properly. Even the smallest details stood out to me. The way the edges were finished was without loose threads. The fabric didn't wrinkle easily, as if it were designed to always fall correctly. The way everything matched without trying too hard, like the room itself had been built around a standard I didn't even know existed. And I understood, even without being told, that this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a nice bed. This was expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. The kind of expense that came from Europe, from specialty designers, from rooms where nothing was accidental. The mattress alone felt like it belonged in a house where people didn't think about replacing furniture because it simply never wore out. Everything in the room suggested that kind of life, quiet luxury, constant maintenance, things chosen for quality instead of necessity. I was suddenly very aware of my own presence in it. My duffel bag on the floor looked too rough. My thrift store clothes felt too ordinary. Even the idea of lying there as I belonged felt strange, like I was borrowing something I didn't have the right to touch. And then Tate shifted beside me as none of that mattered at all. He turned his head toward me, relaxed, like this was just another night, like I wasn't out of place, like the room didn't have levels or rules or invisible boundaries. "Which side do you usually sleep on?" he asked. It was such a normal question that it almost threw me more than anything else. I blinked. Right side." Tate smiled immediately, like I'd answered correctly on a test I didn't know I was taking. "Good choice." I frowned a little. "It is." "Yeah," he said, completely certain. "It's the best side of any bed." Then he shifted under the navy duvet like he was assigning me something official, something permanent, like this had already been decided long before I ever got there. "And it's yours." Something in my chest tightened at that, not fear, not even disbelief exactly, just this strange, unfamiliar pressure, like being given something I didn't know how to ask for, because I knew enough even then to understand what that room represented. Beds like this didn't belong to people like me, not in my world. In places like Tate's, there were unspoken rules about who got to exist in spaces like this, who got access to rooms like this, who was considered guest enough, equal enough, or safe enough to be trusted with something as private as this bed, especially one that clearly cost more than anything I had ever been near. Everything about it, mattress, linen, structure, even the way the bedding was layered together, spoke of money that didn't just buy comfort, but insulation from the rest of the world. It took me a few years of sleeping beside Tate to realize that this wasn't just any bedroom. This was the private suite of the most privileged boy in Los Angeles, perhaps even in all of California. Every detail reflected the extraordinary wealth of the Blue family. The room was larger than many apartments, furnished with quiet luxury rather than extravagance, and designed for the only heir to a vast family fortune. In less than 20 years, Tate would inherit an estate worth millions, perhaps even billions, making him one of the wealthiest young men of his generation. Yet despite everything that surrounded him, the wealth, the privilege, and the expectations that came with being the Blue heir, Tate never seemed to think much about the room itself. To him, it was simply home. To me, it was a world so different from the one I had grown up in that it took years before I truly understood just how extraordinary it was. Tate and I shared the same pillow for more than 20 years. We shared the same mattress, the same blankets, and the same sheets. It was a quiet, unspoken intimacy that simply became our normal. Half the time, my head wasn't even on the pillow. It rested against Tate's chest. Other nights, we'd switch positions and he'd fall asleep with his head on mine. We slept that way throughout our childhood, our teenage years, and well into young adulthood. Sleeping any other way felt unfamiliar, as though neither of us could truly rest without the other's presence nearby. Only years later did I fully appreciate how unusual it all was. The most privileged boy in California slept beside me every night. To the rest of the world, Tate was the heir to an immense family fortune, a young man who would one day inherit extraordinary wealth. But to me, he was never the heir. He was just my buddy, Tate, the boy who let me sit in his lap, steal slices of his pizza, borrow his clothes, and always made room for me beside him in bed. Noah Lunis was the name the wealthy socialites of the Blue household knew him by, the boy from outside their world who had somehow become a constant presence in one of the most powerful families in California. But to Tate, he was never just Noah Lunis. He was Noe. That was the name Tate used when he wasn't thinking about status, money, or the expectations attached to the Blue name. Noe was the person who made him feel comfortable, the person who had been beside him through countless childhood nights and ordinary moments that mattered more than any title or inheritance. To Tate, Noah was his familiar source of comfort, the friend he could laugh with, wrestle with, and sit beside without needing to explain himself. Noah was the person whose presence made the world feel less overwhelming. Tate rarely called him Noah. To everyone else he was Noah Lunis, but to Tate he was simply Noe, the one person who had always been there. Tate viewed Noah's blonde hair as something more precious than his inheritance, his wealth, or the vast liquid assets waiting for him in the future. To Tate, Noah's value had nothing to do with money, status, family name, or social standing. He was simply Noah, and Tate was fiercely protective of him. Anyone who mocked Noah's background, insulted his family, criticized his lack of wealth, or questioned whether he belonged in the Blue household quickly learned that Tate would not tolerate it. Guests who treated Noah as inferior were asked to leave, and many were never invited back. The only exception was when the person involved was a member of Tate's own family, and even then, Tate had little hesitation about making his feelings known. Tate had no problem removing someone from his guest list if they were disrespectful toward Noah. On more than one occasion, his anger got the better of him, and he made his displeasure very clear when someone crossed that line. If someone treated Noah as anything less than an honored guest, Tate saw it as a personal insult. And if someone tried to take Noah's place at a dinner table, Tate would simply tell them to move. To everyone else, Noah was a boy who had been invited into the blue world. To Tate, Noah was the person who made that world worth sharing. And yet there I was, on it, next to him. Like none of those invisible lines existed when it came to Noah. Tate didn't treat it like he was doing something unusual. He didn't hesitate, didn't explain, didn't even look like he considered there might be a difference between us that mattered in this moment. He just stayed close, breathing evenly like this was where I was supposed to be. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do with being placed somewhere without conditions. So I stayed still, letting the weight of the mattress, the softness of the sheets, and the certainty in Tate's voice hold me in place, like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't in the wrong place at all. I noticed something that first morning in Tate's bed that I hadn't really understood the night before. There were no servants, no butlers, no chefs moving around the house the way I'd always imagined people like Tate would have. Neighborhoods like this, I thought there were always extra hands everywhere, people quietly appearing and disappearing, doing everything so the family never had to lift a finger. But Tate's house didn't feel like that. It felt strangely self-contained, almost too calm. The kitchen wasn't crowded. The hallways didn't echo with staff footsteps. It was just the family, the space, and a kind of quiet order that didn't need constant visible help to function. Later, I realized it wasn't that there wasn't help, it was that the help was invisible by design. I woke up the next morning still half disoriented from the softness of the bed, and Tate was already sitting up like he'd been awake for a while. Before I could even fully process where I was, he grabbed my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world and pulled me out of the room. "Come on," he said, like there was somewhere important we needed to be right away. I followed him down the stairs, still adjusting my shirt, still feeling like I was moving through a space that wasn't fully mine yet. The smell hit me first, warm food, sugar, butter, something sweet and rich that filled the entire dining area before I even saw it. When we reached the table, I actually stopped for a second. It was covered, not just set covered, layers and layers of breakfast food spread across the entire surface like someone had tried to offer every possible option at once. There were stacks of golden pancakes with syrup already pooling at the edges, waffles with crisp ridges filled with melting chocolate and strawberries, plates of bacon that looked perfectly glazed and still sizzling slightly, scrambled eggs soft and creamy in a huge serving dish, and fresh fruit cut into bright reds, deep purples, and glowing oranges. There were pastries too, croissants dusted with powdered sugar, muffins bursting with blueberries, even warm cinnamon rolls coated in thick icing that dripped slowly down the sides. Everything looked expensive in a way that didn't need to be announced. Even the simple things weren't simple. The butter had a golden sheen, the syrup sat in glass containers instead of plastic,